There's so many different Kai'Sa builds going around right now in preseason, from crit to hybrid to lethality, but which one is best? In today's video, we're going to be looking at the sleeper OP Korean assassin Kai'Sa build that's having a ton of success in high elo and actually has the highest win rate for any Kai'Sa build right now. We'll be comparing it to the most popular standard crit by testing the damage of both builds and coming up with a conclusion as to which is better in what scenarios. So with that being said, let's jump into it. Alright, so starting things off here, we're going to take a look at the builds at their one item spike equivalent. So for 3,400 gold with the crit setup, you're going to be getting a Kraken Slayer. And then for 3,550 gold, you're going to get a BF sword, a serrated dirk, 2 long swords, and a Doran's blade. And you might be wondering, well, why would I go for this really just weird setup of a bunch of different items? The reason is because you're going to be getting 98 AD from this build path here, which is going to allow you to get a very early Q evolve. And this is to why this Korean setup is very strong. You get a Q evolve at around level 6, level 7, depending on how many kills you're getting early on, and it just allows for you to have a very good early game. So comparing the damage output from the two builds, a Q only is going to deal 356 damage from the lethality setup. Q plus W and passive proc is going to deal 1,004 damage, and then auto only to proc your passive is going to deal 693 damage. And then if we take a look at the Kraken Slayer damage, the how much that does, Q only is going to deal 180 damage, so a lot less there without the evolve. Q plus W and passive 827 damage, and then auto only to proc your passive is going to be dealing 684 damage. So our takeaway so far is that the lethality or the Korean build is going to deal a lot more damage early on than just the Kraken Slayer there. It's going to deal more damage with the Q, the QW, and a passive proc, and then if you're only autoing, it's still going to deal slightly more damage. If you were to auto like more than 5 times, if you were to auto like very extensively, then Kraken Slayer would probably end up beating out the lethality setup there, but a lot of the time you're not going to be doing that, and just having the straight up burst and the ability for you to just chunk an enemy out really quickly is great for early on in the game. Next, if we compare the builds at around 8,600 gold, you're going to have a BF sword, Berserker Greaves, Dustblade, and Nashers for the Korean setup. And at this item spike here, or at these items, this is to where you're going to be the strongest. And then for 8,700, you're going to have a Kraken Slayer, a Runins, Berserker Greaves, and a Rage Knife. So what makes this Korean build really unique at this item spike here is that you have all 3 evolutions on your abilities. Your Q, your W, and your E are all evolved with these items here, and it just allows you to spike really hard in the mid game. So comparing the damage now for this point in the game, Q only with the Korean build is going to be dealing 455 damage, a Q with W and passive is going to be dealing around 1,268, and then autos only to proc your passive is going to be dealing 1,194 damage. And then if we take a look at the crit setup here, Q only is going to be dealing about 343 damage there, Q plus W and passive 1,175, and then auto only to proc your passive is going to be dealing about 950 damage. So what we can take away from this item spike here is that the Korean build is going to win out once again damage wise for every single test we did. So throughout the early to mid game, you are going to be getting more damage output and more value out of this Korean build. And then for the final comparison, this is going to be your final core builds for both of these two different setups here. So for 10,750 gold, you're going to have your Guardian Angel, your Dustblade, your Nashers, your Berserker Greaves, and then I threw in a stopwatch there as well. You could grab something that's about 650 gold equivalent there as well, but I just decided to throw that in because you can go for like a Zhonya's as well. You can go Guardian Angel and Zhonya's with this build. And then for 10,700 gold, you're gonna have your Kraken Slayer, your Runins, your Berserker Greaves, and your Ginsu's. So the damage now at this item spike, you're going to be getting 429 out of your Q, you're going to be getting around 1,203 out of your Q, W, and passive. Autos only to proc your passive is going to be 1,144 damage, and then I just did 10 auto attacks here for this one just to show, the extended amount of damage you'd be dealing in like a late game team fight. So with 10 auto attacks here, 2,361 with the Korean build. Moving on to the crit one now, 327 with your Q only, you're going to be dealing 1,347 with QW and passive proc. Auto only to proc your passive is going to be 1,000, and then 10 auto attacks with this build, you're going to be getting around 2,634 damage. Okay, so now we can see this is the point in the game to where the crit build is going to start to outscale this lethality setup. Now, if you were to go for something different than like a Guardian Angel and Stopwatch there, you could build your BF sword into a Storm Razor, for example, then the damage numbers would be a little bit closer for sure. It just depends on what you want to do with your build path from this point on in the game, and that's just to where damage isn't the only thing that matters, right? Because you're getting that survivability from Guardian Angel, and if you go Stopwatch as well there, allows you to stay alive a lot longer in fights, whereas with the other build, you're only getting damage from that crit setup. So if we go over a bunch of takeaways now to just conclude what we kind of experimented with, you're going to have a lot of early game burst with the lethality or with the Korean setup. Going for the early BF sword, serrated Dirk, getting your early Q evolve just makes your early to mid game so much stronger on Kai'Sa. And if you're paired up with a good aggressive support, like Leona's absolutely busted right now, she's being played a ton, pair her up with the Leona and you get that early Q evolve, you just take over the early game. Once you do get 3 items onward, the crit build is going to be a little bit stronger for you damage wise, but you have to take into consideration how many of your games do you actually reach the 3 item spike. The reason to why this lethality Korean setup is so strong is because you spike so hard off of 2 items, and a lot of games aren't going to be over by that point. 3 items though, like in a lot of your games, you're not going to be getting to a 3 item spike. Games are ending in preseason at around like 26 minutes. The average game time goes up or down a little bit depending on the elo, but considering that you won't even get to like 3 or 4 items, it does make it so that the lethality setup does have a lot more viability than you'd think. And then I do want to point out as well, guys, that damage isn't the only thing that matters when comparing whether or not a build is stronger, right? Because you have to take into consideration, like, what about the Runan's bolt damage in a fight, right? If you're team fighting against multiple tanks and, you know, you're right up close there, getting multiple autos off with your Runans, we didn't test that in this video, so that's something you have to factor in. Also, the survivability that you get from Guardian Angel there, the armor against, like, assassins, right? It can allow you to survive for longer. Also, I think a very underrated part about the build is that you get the invulnerability, or not the invulnerability, the invisibility from Duskblade whenever you get a kill. So it just means that your ability to kite around with Kai'Sa once you jump in is much better in fight. So a lot of things to consider other than damage when you are looking at builds for sure. Alright, so if we round out the video now by just going over the complete build and runes that you should be running if you want to go for this setup on your Kai'Sa, the core build there is going to be Duskblade, BF Sword, Berserker Greaves, and then your Nashor's Tooth. And then situational items, you can build that BF Sword into either a Guardian Angel, you can build it into a Storm Razor, or you can just sit on it and you can go for like a Zhonya's, you can also go for a Collector, but most of the time, you're not even going to reach that point. A lot of your games will end before you even get to 3 items if you're snowballing, if you're playing this build correctly on Kai'Sa, so most of the time you won't really have to worry about building those situational items. And then taking a look at the rune page here, very vital that you do take Hail of Blades. You're not going to be getting a ton of attack speed by going for, you know, the BF Sword early on, by going for Serrated Dirk, so it's really key you do run the Hail of Blades so that you can burst pretty hard with your auto attacks as well. So you go Hail of Blades, Taste of Blood, Eyeball, Ravenous Hunter, and then secondary runes. Important that you are taking Presence of Mind and Bloodline, especially Presence of Mind, because with this build, you do tend to run into mana issues pretty quickly, or pretty easily, I should say, so taking the Presence of Mind does help you out a little bit with that. Alright, so that is gonna be it, guys. That's gonna round out the video. Definitely try this out in your games if you're looking for a new fun build to use in preseason. That's also really strong as well. It's not just like it's a for fun build that you only play in normals. Like, this is actually a very strong build that a lot of high elo Korean players are using right now in solo queue and having a lot of success with it. So if you guys did enjoy this video, be sure to drop a like, subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.